My material's not copyrighted. You can use mine any way you want.
This one's for you, Kent.
If you want to get any of my video materials, they're not copyrighted.
Check it out. You're a fucktard, aren't you, Kent? You're a fucktard, aren't you, Kent? You're a fucktard, aren't you, Kent? You're a fucktard, aren't you, Kent?
There's a variety of cows, and they probably had a common ancestor. It was a cow.
Yahweh is a deity from our imagination. Ah, hey, Kenty. Good to see you, man. Oh, shit, and there's my audience. Hey, beautiful audience. So, do you guys remember that guy Padre? You know, that guy who said an angel told him he'd have a great fortune by May 4th? Well, watch this flashback.
The only woman that's allowed to have premarital sex in my household is my mother. Either you Christianify your home, or I won't come play poker with you anymore.
Not even if I...
By the way, does this smell like coke to you?
I've gotta fix this. That guy's horrible poker is half my income. Either you marry that hipsqueak or you're gonna rot in hell forever.
I'm rotting here already and I enjoy it.
How about I give you 5% of my poker gains?
Who do you think I am? 80% and not 1 cent less.
How about 40% of the poker gains? And that's not all. If you accept now, you get a villa with a lava pool for free.
Okay.
Guys, really, this isn't even worth your time. There's no way in hell I'm ever gonna marry her.
I now pronounce you man and wife. Now piss off. I only have 40 minutes left before my poker evening starts.
Yeah, so I made that Padre video right after that happened, and to be honest, I expected this whole marriage thing would be pretty awful, but we ended up moving into this here villa on May 4th, and since then I've been able to quit my job at Walmart and spend all my time tanning by the lava pool and drinking the tears of the damned through this here silly straw.
Variety of horses, no question. Probably the zebra and the horse had a common ancestor.
Ah yes, the zebra, also known as the African stripy horse. If I know my Bible, which I don't, according to Genesis 30:37-39, non-stripy horses can produce those if they mate in front of some stripy sticks.
But the kids are going to be taught in school tomorrow in your town that the horse used to have 4 toes. Well, there's some things they don't tell the kids about this Eohippus to Equus series, which has been proven wrong 50 years ago, but still is in your textbooks right here in this town. They don't tell them the original so-called horse is the size of a fox. It was a meat eater.
You know, that textbook scan you're showing on the projector has the size in centimeters printed right above each animal. Eohippus, which I suppose is what you'd call the original horse, since you said it's the first in the sequence, is listed at 38 centimeters in height in this image. So I guess your problem isn't that they don't tell the kids the size of the animal, but either that they're using metric, or specifically that they don't compare it arbitrarily to a fox. Oh, and what's that? They don't tell them it was a meat eater, even though it was an herbivore? Gosh, how awful that the teachers aren't compulsive liars. You know, it's weird though. You're implying that this is macroevolution, but then shouldn't Eohippus be a cornstalk that sprouts little mesohippuses?
And had 18 pairs of ribs. The next one had 15 pairs of ribs. A couple of trips through the buzzsaw did that. And then it miraculously grew back 19 pairs of ribs as it evolved, and then back to 18.
Oh my gosh, there's variation in the rib counts of ancient equids? Everybody panic! Evolution is disproven! And so is descent within kinds! Since domestic pigs, which aren't just the same kind, but even the same subspecies, can have anywhere between 13 pairs of ribs in short breeds and up to 17 in long breeds, like the American landrace, which can also have 16, even though variation is impossible! And since the increased number of ribs was likely caused by artificial selection by humans to get more rib meat, I'm sure that'll increase even more once we finish breeding our Texas-sized pigs. I can't wait to order me a full rack of that at that Texas grill. And it doesn't help that the Arabian horse commonly has 17 pairs of ribs, but can have 18, and other horses usually have 18, and Pleiohippus, which you apparently think was the ancestor of horses and zebras,
Probably the zebra and the horse had a common ancestor.
had 19, or that within bear kind, spectacled bears have 13 pairs, while others have 14, or within elephant kind, the African elephant has 20 or 21 pairs, while the Asian elephant has 19 or 20, or within snake kind, the number of ribs varies by hundreds, not 1 or 2 or 5, or that while 12 is typical, humans can have between 11 and 13 pairs. And to stop the creationists who are even worse than you before they have a chance to say it, no, women don't have more ribs than men by default. Nope, apparently it's impossible for the number of ribs to change, even though it happens all the fucking time within what you consider the same kind, so no two animals with different numbers of ribs can be the same kind, and all of a sudden you have who knows how many thousands of extra animals to pack into that ark. It might be hard to find the space, but at least now you can pretend you have a reason to ignore the equid fossil record. I hope it was worth it. You know what? I'm sorry for all the sarcasm. It's just, I've been in such a good mood since I moved into this place and stopped working 22-hour shifts, and I kind of get sarcastic when I'm happy. But you're raising valid... You're raising points, and they deserve my full attention. Okay, look. What you apparently fail to realize is that evolution by natural selection isn't a unilinear process, but sporadic and arbitrary. It has no end goal and no set direction in which to proceed. This idea of there being some inner drive pushing evolution in a single direction is called orthogenesis, and it's an old, thoroughly debunked competitor to natural selection and thus has no place being mentioned even by implication in this discussion. Since paleontologists understand this, they don't base their analysis of the fossils on that faulty assumption. Instead, they look more thoroughly at the anatomy of each fossil, which tells them that there's a progression, regardless of whether the relatively simple change of adding and removing ribs is occurring in between the more significant structural changes that define this sequence.
They also don't tell them the whole thing's been proven wrong a long time ago. Like this guy says in the biology textbook, other examples like the gradual evolution of the horse have not held up under close examination. That's a polite way of saying it's proven wrong, okay?
What an interesting example of confirmation bias. I suspect that just about every other biology textbook you've ever flipped through that mentions equid evolution says that the fossil sequence is valid, but this one that you in your naivete actually think agrees with you is correct because it agrees with you. But I happen to have a copy of this book, and not just that book, but specifically the 1992 edition that you cite, and so I know for a fact that it disagrees with you completely. Wow, you know, it's sure nice when I'm able to track down your ancient and obsolete sources since I can unambiguously state that you're wrong. Tell me, what's this a picture of on page 315? Well, I guess that's a picture of the four-toed Orohippus, which isn't a difficult guess to make since that's what the caption says it is. Oh, and what's this on page 297? Why, that's the book flat out stating that the horse's ancient ancestors had 5 toes. And what's this on page 304? Oh hey, that's your quote mine! But it says something about the gradual evolution of the horse not holding up, and a punctuational model? Whatever could that mean? Oh, look, this is helpful. Here's a modified tree of life from the previous page showing evolution under a gradual and a punctuational model. And here's page 303 talking about gradualism. Well, gee, that's sure not enough information for little old me to figure out what's being referred to after all your Stephen Jay Gould quote mines about gradualism and punctuated equilibrium in the last video. If you're gonna only look for sources that you think agree with your opinion, at least pick ones that actually agree with your opinion.
This G.G. Simpson back in 1950 said the example of the horse family has been unintentionally falsified. They knew 50 years ago this was false.
And I know right now that that's false. You should have been more careful and deleted the last word in that quote mine. It gives your whole game away when you show right in the quotation that the guy is actually arguing against equid evolution being orthogenetic. And it doesn't even help you since your argument about the ribs relies on the evolution of the horse being orthogenetic. So amusingly, what you just quoted explains quite concisely what's wrong with your objection regarding the number of ribs in the fossils. Congratulations. I think that was some of the most inept, self-defeating quote mining I've ever seen.
Why do they keep that in your textbooks?
Because your pathetic backfired quote mines don't determine the science curriculum?
This whole thing was made up by Othniel C. Marsh in 1874. He picked animals from all over the world and put them in order the way he thought it might have happened. They were never found in that order.
I'm not sure where you got that idea, but I have a guess, and I'm sure we'll have to discuss the geologic column later, so I'll leave this alone. For now.
Modern horses are found in the same layers as the so-called ancient Equus or Eohippus horse. They're found in the same layer. So it can't be the ancestor, that's for sure.
I'm impressed, Kent. I didn't know you knew Russian. And after your comment about Stephen Jay Gould being a Marxist professor and even citing him as such in a slide, I must confess I didn't expect you to read Soviet communist mouthpiece newspapers from the 80s. Maybe you were a bit of secret lefty back in day. Ha ha ha. Of course, since it's a bit hard to find copies of Moskovskaya Pravda from 1984, much less to read all that Russian, it's next to impossible to figure out exactly what they said and if you're representing the article accurately, which I'm sure suits you just fine. But more importantly, it's a single newspaper which is worthless as a scientific source. You'd think that someone outside of Russia might have found a finding as extraordinary as this interesting enough to report on in English so you didn't have to learn a whole new alphabet and language just to read about it. Preferably a scientist, but hell, maybe even a few other daily newspapers. Apparently not, though. Funny that. The only place this seems to survive at all is in creationist circle jerk communities. Now, why might that be?
The ancient horse is nothing but a Hyrax which is still alive today.
Your slide says Hyrax, so I'll assume that's what you meant, since it's a bit redundant to say Hyrax is Hyrax. So Hyrax just a Hyrax, huh? Not even some Noah's Ark ancestor of the Hyrax, but actually a Hyrax? Okay, well, that's easy enough to test. So I have 3 pictures of skulls. The modern horse, the Hyrax and the Hyrax. So first let's take a look at the teeth. There's a really easy way to depict the number of each kind of teeth on each side of the mouth, which is called a dental formula. The dental formula of Equus, the modern horse, is, on the top, 3 incisors, 1 canine, 3 or 4 premolars, and 3 molars. And on the bottom, 3 incisors, 1 canine, 3 premolars, and 3 molars. The dental formula for the Hyrax is, on the top, 1 incisor, 0 canines, 4 premolars, and 3 molars. And on the bottom, 2 incisors, 0 canines, 4 premolars, and 3 molars. So which one's more similar to Hyrax? Well, Hyrax has on the top 3 incisors, 1 canine, 4 premolars, 3 molars. And on the bottom, 3 incisors, 1 canine, 4 premolars, and 3 molars. Which, just based on the numbers, makes it more similar to the modern horse, which has almost exactly the same dental formula. And that's not even mentioning that the Hyrax incisors are definitely not the big funny rodent-like incisors of the Hyrax. And now the nose. Equus has this big pointy-ass nasal bone. The Hyrax, well, doesn't, because it has this cute little button nose. Jaw. So which one's most like Hyrax? Yeah, that's right, the horse. So what about in the rest of the skeleton? Because I've heard the claim from creationists that Hyrax and Hyrax are exactly the same except for the skull. Well, Equus has a longer tail than the Hyrax, and so does Hyrax, and Equus has this big, fat, thick, bent pelvis, while the Hyrax has this teensy nothing of a pelvis. The Hyrax has one that looks like a scary skull!
That's a duck.
What are you talking about? Don't you see the skull?
It looks like a great, big, enormous duck.
Well, you see, you gotta squint and sort of turn your head and... Ooh, it's just so scary.
If you squint and turn your head, it looks like a bunny.
Well, anyway, Equus has these big, long, creepy feet. You see this part right here? That's part of the foot. It's the same as this part, and the Hyrax's stubby little tenderfoots. And the Hyrax, you guessed it, big, long, creepy feet. And Equus has 18 pairs of ribs, but that's not really relevant here since we've already established that the number of ribs may have varied over the course of equid evolution. But what is relevant is that the Hyrax has 21 pairs of ribs, while the Hyrax has 18. I thought that a differing number of ribs was a problem for similarity, but apparently a difference of 3 pairs within the same species is fine as long as it serves your narrative. If you were consistent, though, the differing number of ribs should be the only nail needed to secure the coffin closed on this one. But I guess you just ignored this fact, so I'll keep going. Equus has no floating ribs. The Hyrax has like freaking... Christ, that's a lot. 7? 7 pairs? Looks like about 7. I mean, look at this mess. So Hyrax, which is just a Hyrax, also has 7 pairs of floating ribs, right? No, it has 2. So based on just this cursory comparison, I'd have to say that these are definitely not the same animal. And that's just the obvious broad strokes kind of stuff. They're major differences, not details. About the only thing they actually have in common is a basic mammalian body plan. As a matter of fact, I'd say they're so different that even a 5-year-old could tell them apart. Hey, Misty? Hi again, Misty. Hey, which one's not like the others, Misty? Okay, cool. Thanks, Misty. Yeah, I was pretty confident, Kent, but now that it's past the 5-year-old test that you designed, I know for sure that the Hyrax isn't a Hyrax.
By the way, the ribs, the toes, the teeth are very different in these animals.
Why yes, the ribs, the toes, and the teeth are very different between the Hyracotherium and the Hyrax, which is why it's so easy to identify them as radically different species. First you tell me you read communist newspapers, and now you're debunking your own claims. Are you feeling alright? Do you need a doctor? Or did you mean the equid fossils differ from each other, even though they share far more similar ribs, toes, and teeth than the Hyracotherium and the Hyrax, which are apparently indistinguishable? Your whole threesome of complaints about the ribs and the toes and the teeth is pretty weak, which I suppose is why you skipped over it in such a hurry. Oh, and by the way, doesn't objecting to their interrelatedness just make things worse for you, since that's just more animals that had to be packed onto the ark? Since you're just making things up anyway, and you already believe in evolution within kinds, why not just say Equus and all the ancient equids are the same kind, and all that evolution happened since the flood? It's not so much more of a stretch than what you already propose, is it? And hell, having just Hyracotherium on the ark instead of Equus would even save you a lot of space, since it's so much smaller, and it'd make the ark story that much more plausible. But wait, there's more! You could also totally remove Mesohippus and Merychippus and all the other ancient equids with different numbers of ribs, which apparently is an impossible variation to evolve and therefore must all be different kinds, freeing up all those valuable tickets for other animals. And all for only the low, low price of accepting supercharged microevolution. You could just say the process was faster in the past because there'd been less time since the fall, or God accelerated it to populate the planet the way he wanted it, or something. Really, Kent, why am I a better creationist than you are?
In South America, the fossils go exactly backwards. Instead of three-toed to one-toed, it goes one-toed to three-toed in the fossil order. They won't talk about that much, but you check it out. That's a fact, folks.
Funny thing about that, I'm pretty sure I already have. It seems that chemist-scientist John Morris Pendleton stole and butchered your crappy argument in Hello, I'm a Scientist episode 11. If so, then what you're actually talking about aren't horses at all, but the South American ungulate order Leptopterna, which happened to contain a vaguely horse-like single-toed genus called Thoatherium. But at least you didn't screw up as badly as Pendleton, who thought they were still alive. Just like pterosaurs, apparently. Maybe after he's done trapping pteros, he'll go Thoatherium hunting.
Do you know that we have living today in South America animals that have 3 toes on every leg, that have a main hoof with 2 toes further up the leg, and with the main hoof or toe? That's really not evolution.
They're never found in the order presented in the textbooks.
I don't know what order Leptopterna fossils are presented in the textbooks, but thanks for acknowledging that the fossils are always found arranged in the same order. At least that acknowledges the consistent ordering of strata and the idea of fossil progressions.
Three-toed and one-toed graze side by side.
Could be. I wouldn't be surprised to find some overlap there. Wait, let me see that slide. Three-toed and one-toed horses graze side by side? So you acknowledge that the three-toed and one-toed specimens are all horses? As in the same kind, and therefore the variation in the toes is an evolutionary adaptation, or is that just a typo? You know what, I'll assume it's a typo because it conflicts with everything you've said so far. I mean, the whole reason you presented the differences in the number of ribs was to try to say that they didn't evolve, and you implied that none of the horse's ancestors had 4 toes. Not to mention trying to show that they're different animals because their ribs, toes, and teeth are different, which although you timed it so poorly that it could have been taken, seriously or in jest, as a refutation of your comparison of Hyracotherium to a Hyrax, was actually meant to imply that Mesohippus and Hyracotherium and Equus and so on aren't related. But even if you don't think there were one-toed and three-toed actual horses, the reasoning you presented for three-toed and one-toed horse-like animals living at the same time is that the fossils are always found in order from one-toed to three-toed. How the hell does that follow?
Tulsa Zoo finally took out their display because so many folks complain, why do you have this horse evolution display in the zoo? It's been proven wrong 50 years ago. Take it out.
A bunch of idiots threw a hissy fit until the zoo gave in to shut them up, and therefore equid evolution is wrong. Maybe you didn't take it quite all the way to that conclusion, but that's what you want your audience to do in their heads. And based on their behavior thus far, they'll probably comply.
And you folks ought to get together with your school board and say, look, on page whatever it is, 952 of our textbook, it says the horse evolved from a 4-toed ancestor. Let's cut this page out.
On the basis of what you've just presented? The Hyracotherium was a Hyrax and George Gaylord Simpson said horse evolution wasn't orthogenetic? Yeah, good luck.
If you had a page in your textbook teaching the kids the earth was flat, would it be okay to demand that that page be removed?
Yep.
You don't have to buy a whole new book. Just cut the page out. It won't cost the school anything.
No, I'd go so far as to say the entire textbook should probably be replaced, since I doubt the rest of it would be much better, and the school should immediately seek out a different publisher to do business with. That's the same reason Of Pandas and People is disallowed from classrooms instead of just being edited to shreds with a scalpel. It's an important and too often neglected duty of the schools to use good, accurate, up-to-date biology textbooks. Ones that contain 10 whole pages on equid evolution just to piss you off.
Peabody Museum still has the horse evolution on display. As I stood, I've been there many times, makes my blood boil every time I walk in that place.
Oh, you might have an allergy to something in there. Maybe you should stop going.
I'm standing there looking at this lie proven wrong 50 years ago while hundreds of kids come through in school groups. The kids are never told, well, this has been proven wrong, boys and girls.
Your only piece of evidence for it being proven wrong 50 years ago was a quote mine from one man about how horses' orthogenetic evolution was falsified, which is of course irrelevant to whether modern horses evolved by natural selection from ancestors similar to the ones in that fossil series, since the idea of orthogenesis has long since been abandoned in favor of better supported ones. Your non sequitur deserves to be taken about as seriously as if you'd read me a passage from Euclid's Elements and asserted that therefore Elvis Presley was a hologram.
They asked the folks at the Tulsa Zoo before they took the display down, they said, why don't you take this display down? The zoo director said, we don't have the funding to remove it. I've got all the letters back and forth on that. Man.
I'd be mildly interested to get my hands on those letters. Never gonna happen though, I imagine. But anyway, if those letters say what you say they say in the way you say they say it, which is hard to say today, I have to say. Sorry, I got a bit carried away. But if they do, then that zoo director shouldn't have given you such a lame excuse. What he should have said is, oh, you ignoramuses want the display removed because it doesn't depict orthogenetic evolution and you think a Hyrax is a Hyrax? Take it up with the scientific community. You might get a little more humble after a good intellectual spanking. Now get out of my office!
Folks, there's quite a variety of horses today, okay? There's big horses and little horses. I was in Baton Rouge, Louisiana a few months ago. Got to see where they raised the 30-inch tall horses. I mean, my dog's bigger than that.
What's the point of mentioning this? A little while ago, I showed pretty conclusively that you think the ancient equid fossils are mostly not horses, except maybe the one-toed ones like Pleohippus, which you apparently think is the common ancestor of horses, donkeys, and zebras anyway, even though it's probably not. So you're not trying to create the impression that the fossils are just miniature modern horses because you don't think they are. So while it's possible that you've actually got a point to make here, based on my experience with you thus far, my guess is that you'll just mention this, fail to explain how it's relevant in any way to your argument, and quickly change the subject. Go ahead. Prove me wrong.
What do you do with a 30-inch horse? Look at it, I guess is about it. And they sell them for $10,000. Sucker born every minute, I guess. But one lady wrote me a letter and said, Mr. Hovind, we crossbreed zebras, ponies, horses.
Stop. So I was right. You didn't have a point.
Horses, and mules. Not mules.
Right. No point at all. You are such a
jackass. And we raise zonkies, zorses, zeonies. They cross every which way. Well, that's probably because they're the original same kind. No problem there.
No disagreement here. I don't see how Zorses and Zonkies would be evidence against creationism either, so I reject the lady's point too, assuming that was its purpose. Anyway, it's really good to see from your slide that you accept that descent can produce species with different numbers of chromosomes. I honestly didn't expect that.
Then they're going to tell the kids, well, we have evidence for this theory. We think that one animal changed another, and we can show evidence because many animals have similar forelimb structure. This is called the argument from homology. Well, what do they tell the kids? They'll say, boys and girls, you have two bones in your wrist, radius and ulna. And boys and girls, look at the whale's flipper carefully. Did you know the whale has two bones in his flipper, and they're called the radius and the ulna? Same as ours. Wow, who named them, teacher? The whale? Think about it.
Yes, people, please think about it. Nobody has argued that forelimb structures are homologous because the bones have the same names. Labels only exist for the purpose of streamlining communication. The names are the same because the arrangement of the bones is the same. That's why once you know what, for example, an ulna is in one tetrapod species, you know exactly which bone that label applies to in any other tetrapod species, and that goes for the other bones as well. So if someone hands you a tetrapod forelimb and tells you to look at the ulna, as long as you've seen the bones of, say, a human arm, you'll know exactly what to look at without even knowing what species the bones are from. It's the same reason we use the word rib for a whale's rib and a Hyrax's rib, or the word tooth for a Hyrax's tooth and a horse's tooth. Why would you propose having a different label for every bone in every species when using the same label for bones in the same place works so much better on a purely practical level?
But this is one of the evidences for evolution. They're going to say, boys and girls, comparative anatomy provides further evidence of evolution.
Comparative anatomy, yes. Similarities in the structure, not the labels.
The commonalities suggest that these and other vertebrate animals are all related. They probably evolved from a common ancestor.
Indeed so, since the fossils show not only a striking similarity between forelimb structures and all the rest, but also striking progressions between the variations on this theme. The similarity itself, without any chronological information, would be evidence for some sort of relationship between the fossils, which could be anything from common descent to common design to who knows what else. Based on the ability to construct objective nested hierarchies that are possible with evolved things such as languages, but impossible for non-evolved things such as car models, would still skew the evidence strongly in common ancestry's favor, but it wouldn't be as strong without the corroboration of the progression. That's why the progression is the stronger evidence for change over time. Similarity on its own, absent any progression, has no time dimension within which the change can occur and provides many fewer hints at change over time, which is of course why you like to try to convince people, like you did earlier, that the fossils aren't found in order, even though they are.
Well, duh. That's stupid, okay? Maybe they all had the same designer. Doesn't prove a common ancestor.
I'm starting to notice a really interesting strategy that you employ. You seem to ignore the fact that the corroboration of multiple lines of evidence is what makes the theory of evolution so solid. Instead of going through your talk and trying to dismantle each line of evidence separately and then concluding your speech with, "and because all lines of evidence fail to account for the facts, evolution is not well supported," you instead use a divide and conquer method of taking one piece of evidence, pretending as if it exists in a vacuum and isn't corroborated by other types of evidence, and then saying that that piece of evidence alone does not prove common ancestry. You did the same thing with the beaks of Darwin's finches, for example. This doesn't strike me as particularly useful when the true power of the evidence lies in the corroboration of multiple, very different kinds of evidence. Think of it like a court case. As you may know, the prosecution doesn't simply present one piece of evidence and rest their case. Instead, they present a number of pieces of evidence of various kinds, each one of which may or may not be convincing on its own, but which corroborate each other and help to solidify some point in order to build what will be a rock-solid case, if the defendant is actually guilty and if they have enough valid evidence. No sane judge would declare that because any single piece of evidence does not conclusively prove the defendant's guilt, the case must be thrown out. But that's exactly how you've operated thus far.
By the way, the bones develop from different genes in these different organisms. They are not homologous organisms like they want you to believe.
Frankly, Kent, I have no idea what you're talking about. You didn't cite a source or anything for this one, and it flies so completely in the face of all of modern genetics that all I can really be bothered to do is tell you to stop trying so hard to ignore everything learned by scientists in the past 4 decades, and then go with my gut and debunk something that you may or may not be adapting this from because I fucking wanna! I suspect you're talking about something that John Pendleton once talked about, and if he talked about it, there's a pretty good chance he got it from you somewhere. It's an argument that's quite popular with the creationists who like to rely on ancient science, which is a club that you most definitely belong to. You know, a while back a creationist left a comment accusing me of relying on obsolete science from the 1960s and early 1970s, and yeah! Of course I do, because I correct creationists' misrepresentations of science and they cite stuff from that time frame even when they're making their presentation well after the turn of this century. So to whoever left that comment, the problem's on your side, buddy, not mine. So what I'm guessing you're talking about is that old thing by Sir Gavin de Beer, his 1971 biology reader, Homology, an Unsolved Problem. Now obviously I'm not completely sure since you didn't cite it, and it's about fruit fly eyes and not tetrapod forelimbs, but it's relevant to the topic. Besides, I want to talk about it because I've talked about it before and I don't think I did it justice. This time I have a copy of the source material, which is helpful. So let me try to explain what this thing is about. Homology, an Unsolved Problem is much cited but apparently not much read by creationists. It's an Oxford biology reader for high school or college students in which de Beer concluded that homologous genes don't necessarily control homologous organs, which is what you're telling me is true of the tetrapod forelimbs as well, and that's why this is relevant. De Beer based his conclusion on a fruit fly experiment from 1929 by T.H. Morgan called The Variability of Eyeless, in which a line of flies with the eyeless gene were bred. This is a recessive characteristic, which means that the fly inherited it from both parents, and so the normal eye-controlling allele wasn't present. When this line of eyeless flies was inbred, it would occasionally produce a fly with eyes. De Beer knew that these eyed flies had an unchanged eyeless gene because when the eyed fly was bred with an original wild eyed fly, the offspring could be eyeless. So he knew that the eyed flies from the eyeless line still appeared genetically eyeless based on the eyeless gene alone, so something else had to be putting the eyes back. Nowadays, suppression of the function of a gene without modification to it would easily be explained by, for example, intergenic suppressor mutations, which occur elsewhere in the genome and don't alter the gene in question. This way, the eyeless mutation could be passed on to offspring, but the suppressor mutation not necessarily, and therefore the offspring would be eyeless again. But probably neither De Beer nor Morgan would have known about suppressor mutations, which is why in genetics it's a really bad idea to rely on high school readers from 1971 based on experiments from 1929. So lacking any other explanation, De Beer came up with the idea that the function of the missing normal eye-controlling gene must have been taken over by other genes. And therefore, since it seemed that the original eye-controlling gene wasn't required and its function could be taken over by other genes, he concluded that the existence of homologous structures didn't imply that the same genes were controlling them. It wasn't a bad guess before the existence of DNA sequencing, but definitely wasn't correct, and De Beer's pamphlet is irrelevant in any modern discussion of genetics.
Similar design might prove the same engineer made the design.
Not sure how you could prove it wasn't designed by committee, but alright, possibly you could demonstrate some kind of common design if you could first show that it was actually designed. Of course, you don't demonstrate design, you just assert it. Before anyone but the slack-jawed simpletons in your audience take you seriously, you're gonna have to come up with some way to positively test for design, which so far I haven't heard from you in this speech or anywhere else. Even if you somehow manage to undermine evolution, although clearly if anyone does that, it's not gonna be you, you'd still have to build up a detailed, useful, predictive, compelling theory of design that takes every fact into account, not just the ones that suit the creationists, and doesn't include any Bible verses. I've read and seen and heard a lot of creationist material, and I've got zero confidence, if even that much, that they're capable of even understanding what they would involve, let alone accomplishing it. But I guess there's always a chance.
A lot of bridges in the world are kind of similar to each other. You can go compare, different suspension bridges around the world, Golden Gate Bridge and other bridges, and there's a lot of similarities. That doesn't prove one is the father of the other.
I don't recall hearing about these newfangled reproducing bridges, nor the bridges fossilized throughout strata which can be organized chronologically, resulting in a clear record of morphological change. Where can I learn more about this marvelous discovery?
Or that a tornado put them up.
I also don't recall anyone saying that evolution means modern horses originated by a tornado passing through a puddle of primordial soup. Reproduction with mutations and selection pressures is in no way like a tornado building a bridge. Even your fellow creationists are smarter than that. Yet, they'll use that sort of example against a misrepresentation of abiogenesis, but most aren't dumb enough to use it against evolution by natural selection.
No, it's a design that works good, okay?
Yeah, well, bridges are as they are because they're adapted to their surroundings, and they stand or fall based on how well they were adapted to those surroundings, and designs that collapse generally go extinct, and their place is taken by a better suited design, so... yeah, bridges do have a selection factor based on whether they, in your words, work good. So I guess it's not really that terrible of a way to explain natural selection to a first grader by analogy, but I'm still not really a fan.
I discovered that the Pontiac lug nuts from a Pontiac will fit on a Chevy. They will. That proves they both evolved from a Honda 14 million years ago. No, the same engineers are designing these cars.
Wow, did you come up with that all by yourself? Golly, Kent, you ought to write that sucker up and submit it to Nature. The Comparative Nut Anatomy of Automobiles. I'm sure they'll publish it as long as you remember to include your chart of the average lengths and weights of blue versus skin-colored truck nuts.
You're a fucktard, aren't you, Kent? You're a fucktard, aren't you, Kent? I don't think he knows the shit that he believes is just a fucking joke. But what is really sad is people out there buying into the shit he preaches.
I'm lagging.
Yeah.
I suck.
Yeah.
How am I supposed to deal with this?
I don't know, but you cannot film with a mask. Okay, let me go.
Oh, price of accepting.
Jesus Christ. Okay, let's go.
And all for only the low.
The timing is so off. I don't know what's going on.
Sorry.
It's so off, I don't know what's going on. But okay, let's try it. It's because I don't know what to do there, even.
What, you don't know what to do?
I don't know how to do this. I need beer. Good enough, fuck it.
I like you under beer.
I don't have no fucking rhythm. Whatevs.
It's good, come on.
Gotta get my rhythm. Okay.
The to try to say that
Okay.
they didn't evolve.
Okay.
I'm not wearing pants. I don't need to give them quality.
No.
Let them eat dog food. Okay.
You know, they find it awesome anyway.
Yeah, whatever.
Okay.
Sycophants. Whatever. I do what I want.
Huh?
I do what I want.
Good.
Yeah.
Yay! Beer really helps.
Yeah, I know, right?
Yeah.
You gotta have that in the house when you go from now on.
Yeah.
The entire
Can
textbook.
we have less of a laugh? Gag?
Is that a laugh?
Lag? Is what I'm trying to say. Gotta do it again.
Wait. 3, 2.
Okay.
No, he's laughing.
Oh no.
Too much beer?
Maybe. Maybe too much beer for this. I have no clue.
You have no clue.
No clue if that was any good. None! Too much beer. Too much beer. Alert! Alert! Whoop, 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 whoop.
Okay.
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 Frankly, Ken, I
Okay.
have